Hello, my name's Chris. What's yours? Welcome back to Marathon Man, where I'm going through Doctor Who from the very beginning, and you join me as we recap Season 9. Never taking anything for granted on a marathon, I did still, on some level, expect Season 9 to be a bit of a bumpy ride. In its 5 stories, it manages to be quite changeable, so I knew that I would find some of them fairly tough going. It's just that I didn't precisely know which ones they'd be. I braced myself for Day of the Daleks, because the last time I'd seen it, it had been fairly underwhelming, so I went in with my guard up. And that did seem to help the experience, even though it didn't really help the story very much. Despite some very decent elements, Anat being the one that instantly springs to mind, it still wasn't the glorious return to the show for the Daleks that it should have been. Even if you're not a fan of the Daleks, this story should have still felt like a bigger deal than it, ends up feeling. Not just a return to the show for the Doctor's most recognisable foe, but a return after a fairly long absence of, some icons of popular culture. And that's what we ended up with. So after this expected introduction to the 9th season came The Curse of Peladon, a story which I had down as one of those reliably entertaining ones. It didn't let me down either, matching the enjoyment I'd previously gleaned from it with its delightful patchwork of every era of Doctor Who so far, while remaining fundamentally rooted in the Pertwee era, the liberal sensibilities of which making for rather good drama when repositioning some former foes as allies. Then, for the 3rd story in a row, we had some returning monsters, this time the Dino Men. The Sea Devils, cousins to the Silurians, make their appearance in the story named for them, and rather than matching my memory of the story, the serial managed to surpass what I already thought of it to become what I view as yet another bona fide classic of the 3rd Doctor era. A slightly more, if you'll forgive the word, brainless affair than the story it's ostensibly a sequel to. It's nevertheless no less entertaining, and in fact actually I think the approach pays dividends. On a roll, I may have let that excitement get the better of me if it weren't for an unsatisfying experience with the mutants on the last marathon. Maybe that tempered expectations, because I actually found more to like this time, but the less than subtle approach taken by the Sea Devils is put to good use there, but in the mutants the lack of nuance backfires for me. The message of the story, though laudable, is kind of forced on the viewer, which means I had very little to do except just passively watch it. And sometimes passively watching something and let it wash over you is absolutely fine, and sometimes the order of the day. It's just that, I don't know, if it feels like it thinks it's being cleverer than it is, because it then comes across as a bit precocious, rather than just sort of washing over you in a good way. I found myself just sort of tuning out. There needed to be something else in lieu of subtlety and subtext, and I couldn't find it. Disappointed, I reached the Season 9 finale. Acutely aware of the Time Monster's reputation, I was cautious, and I never disliked it as much as everyone else seemed to. In fact, I'd always rather liked it without loving it. But given how Day of the Daleks and the mutants both crept up a little bit, could this be the time my opinion changed and I saw the Time Monster for the dud most people say it is? Lucky for me that, again, I had a great time with the Time Monster. Now, it was the most recent video on the marathon, so I'm not going to get into it again and repeat myself. Just suffice to say, it was a lovely way to end the season. And so, what does the top 10 at the end of Season 9 now look like? Number 10. Doctor Who and the Silurians. A drop of one place implies a new entry for Season 9, and it probably will be no surprise which one. Even though Spearhead from Space introduced the new format, I think this one is where it looked like it would fundamentally work. No doubt a brand new show from what it had been, but with enough residual DNA to be a continuation, with a stellar idea for a story as well. Number 9. The Mythmakers. A lot of stories which enjoyed higher placings early on are gradually being inched out the more we go on, and that's only to be expected. But if you're curious, on my last marathon, this was still at number 1 at this point after season 9, so that goes to show how much can differ from one marathon to the next. Number 8, Marco Polo. If Doctor Who and the Silurians showed exactly what Doctor Who of the 70s would be like and capable of, then I think Marco Polo is the story which showed exactly what Doctor Who of the 60s would be like and capable of. The earliest missing story and still one of the very best. Number 7, The Sea Devils. Season 9's new entry, and I did used to think this one as slightly inferior to its predecessor, but this one moves along so well and crams more in that touch more gracefully that it feels like not just a worthy sequel, but in actual fact a better one. Number 6, The Aztecs. At this point on the last marathon, this was at number 2, so again, it proves to me why doing this exercise and watching Doctor Who in this way is so rewarding. I never have the same experience twice. Number 5, The Mind Robber. One of the most unique stories in all of Doctor Who. It's no wonder it remains so high. Doctor Who Unleashed may be the name of the new making of series to accompany the current era of the programme, but it could also be an appropriate description of the Mind Robber. Number 4, The Time Meddler. An accomplished yarn told in 4 pacey episodes could mean this story would get overlooked, but the fact that it brought with it foundation-shaking additions to the show and the format means that it will always be one of the most important stories of all of Doctor Who. And its importance is matched by how brilliant it is. Number 3, The Massacre. Whereas The Time Meddler brings with it foundation-shaking additions to the show and format, this one doesn't affect the show going forward. I would argue it's still as foundation-shaking in terms of its format and execution though, but this exists as a one-off, and so it doesn't enjoy the glory the Time Meddler receives, but I do think it's just as deserving. Number 2, The War Games. How a story this long sustains its momentum quite as well as it does is down to Malcolm Hawke and Terrance Dicks, and they do so with such skill that it almost looks like showing off. Writing out a Doctor, introducing his people, and managing to be futuristic and historical all in one exciting package. Number 1, Inferno. At number 4 on my last marathon at this same point, the fact that it's now sitting at number 1 does feel odd to me, but I can't look at its placing here and disagree with it. Season 7 getting 50% of its stories in the top 10 speaks to its quality. One constant throughout this season is the Doctor himself. Now, I did fall out with him a little bit in the previous season, and one brilliant story still wasn't enough to stop me from being slightly suspicious of him. However, this time he's been nothing short of magnificent. Pertwee has eschewed some of the more unsavoury elements of his performance and calibrated his Doctor into perhaps the most caring and compassionate of the 3 so far. His friendship with Jo has developed into one of the strongest the show has seen, and I am so happy to have made peace with the 3rd Doctor. A noticeable wobble in the last season still means that he hasn't surpassed William Hartnell or Patrick Troughton in my estimations as the Doctor, but his high points have ensured that I am fully confident of the fact that it's 3 for 3 on leading men. And so what about the companions? Well, we didn't have a new one introduced in season 9. Jo's placing has changed dramatically based on how fantastic I thought she was in season 9 compared to season 8. So where is she in the top 10 now? Number 10, Ian Chesterton. Because Jo was at this point at the end of season 8, Ian has now been bumped down and is hanging on for dear life in the top 10. Again, it shows how opinions change from marathon to marathon, but more pertinently, it shows how highly I think of all the companions on this list. Ian is fantastic, and he's number 10. Number 9, Ben Jackson. Fulfilling the Ian-type role, as Stephen had done before him, Ben feels like neither of those characters, and that's testament to Michael Craze. An excellent performance in a show which came to overlook him a tiny little bit. Still, season 4 would feel lesser without the presence of Ben. Number 8, Victoria Waterfield. Far more layered than I used to give her credit for, Season 5 would feel lesser without the presence of Victoria. The show may favour Jamie in both Seasons 4 and 5 over Ben and Victoria respectively, but Victoria manages to make herself heard that little bit more, and it isn't just because of the screaming. A brilliant companion. Number 7. Liz Shaw. We didn't spend all that long with her in story terms, just the 4, but Caroline John definitely made an impression. She is a big factor for me in why Inferno works as well as it does, and as that is my new favourite story at this point, it's no wonder I'm as fond of Liz as I am. Number 6. Stephen Taylor. An action man, a caring older brother, and even the de facto lead in one story. Stephen could so easily have been a lesser copy of Ian, but in Peter Purvis's hands becomes one of the First Doctor's best companions. I'm boring myself saying how good he was in The Massacre, but check out any of his stories and he'll still impress you. Number 5. Vicky Pallister. And Vicky could so easily have been a lesser copy of Susan, but she reinvigorates the show and its lead cast when she breezes in towards the beginning of its second season. Maureen O'Brien is one of the best actors to ever play a companion, and Vicky, therefore, is one of the best companions. Number 4. Jamie McCrimmon. Perhaps, just perhaps, he'd be a little bit higher if he hadn't stayed for so long. Zoe makes Troughton's final year in the role feel a bit fresher, combined with a different approach to making the show from Season 5. But Jamie, despite his longevity, is still a joy with the Second Doctor. And with Zoe, actually. So, no what, scratch that. He may not place so highly if he didn't have that final year with Zoe and the Second Doctor together. So, what a team. Number 3. Zoe Herriot. And why she just edges ahead of Jamie is simply that she is a big reason why Season 6 feels so fresh to me. She forms a relationship with Jamie and the Doctor which improves upon the one Victoria did, and she also has character consistency in a way a lot of the female companions of the 60s did not have. Number 2. Jo Grant. From number 10 to number 2 in the space of Season 9. That's how fantastic I found her in this batch of episodes. After impressing from the off, Katie Manning was saddled with some unfortunate scripting, but in the 5 stories of Season 9, she has seen a sharp rise in the quality of her character on the page. This means she has raised her own performance, something which she was under no obligation to do considering how good she's already been. The upshot of this is that, to my mind, Jo Grant has exceeded the potential she showed last season to become perhaps the quintessential companion, particularly when you consider it would become the default setting for the Doctor to have one plucky female companion. Number 1. Barbara Wright. So, how can Barbara still be at the top following that glowing praise of Jo? Well, I go back to how real Barbara feels as a person. Jacqueline Hill manages to transcend television making practices of the time in a way a lot of the actors on the show, Doctors included, haven't always been able to. In other words, from that very first episode to the final episode of The Chase, I believe 100% in Barbara Wright. I'm now over halfway through Pertwee's time in the TARDIS, and as with the other Doctors, I actually find that, hard to fathom. They all make their mark on the show so indelibly that it's something of a jolt to realise that I'm actually closer to their departure than I am to their arrival. Still, there are 2 more seasons left with Pertwee, and in those 2 seasons he is able to become fully the wandering Doctor that his 2 predecessors were. And what this will do to my perception of him, I'm keen to find out, so on to Season 10. As ever, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this recap of Season 9, then you know how YouTube works. Please do hit the like thumb and give it a great big share. And what do you think of Season 9? Is it one of Pertwee's best, or is his era becoming diluted by the DNA of Doctor Who past? And what do our top 10s look like? Is yours similar to mine? Should Jo Grant have sailed straight to the top? And is the Sea Devils actually better than Doctor Who and the Silurians? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you back here soon for the return of some familiar faces. So if you don't want to miss that, hit the subscribe button, clang the cloister bell, and I'll see you for a Doctor Who birthday party.